Hi, thank you for joining us. My name is Natalie Lewis from Wyndham Brannon, and I have my colleague here.
Paul Zavitz.
So today we're going to talk about increasing fraud risk during inflationary times. So Paul, I hear that we're in an inflation.
I think I've heard that too.
Yeah.
Yes.
So companies, what do they need to be aware of related to fraud risk during these inflationary times? So we're going to talk about that. And first off, we're going to discuss the elements of fraud. So Paul, why don't you give us an overview of what's the fraud triangle anyway?
So fraud triangle, it's been around for a long time. It's opportunity, pressure, and rationalization. Those are the three key elements of when a fraud is committed.
Okay, so there's the triangle. Now I'm hearing there's the diamond.
Right.
So what is that?
We've transitioned to the diamond. We've added capability. You've got to have the capability to commit the fraud. So you add that in. So now it becomes a diamond.
Okay, good to know. So with that, there are threats that a company faces. And with those, there's internal threats and external threats. And so first off, we're going to go through what are those threats that companies face internally. So in-house, what companies should be aware of. And with those, I would say that top of mind is loosening internal controls. And we'll kind of go through what kind of leads to companies having looser internal controls than maybe they previously had. And then also with that, employee dishonesty or employee theft leading to fraud. And there's also financial statement fraud that could be happening. So, Paul, with loosening internal controls, what's causing this?
Yeah. So in this environment, companies may feel pressure, financial pressure, so they might lay people off. And when you lay people off, you're going to have aspects of controls that maybe just aren't being performed.
True.
When that person's not replaced or isn't going to be replaced for quite some time, unless you go in and change that control environment, you're just going to loosen those controls because you still want the business to be efficient.
Absolutely. And then also, a lot of people are still working from home. With COVID, I think we all learned that we could work pretty much anywhere with an internet connection.
Yep.
So a lot of companies are still allowing that remote workforce. And so with that, it's causing companies to have to reevaluate those internal controls when people are not physically in an office. So with that, are companies reevaluating their internal controls as they're adding staff or finding that more staff are working from home or maybe on a beach somewhere? That sounds nice.
Yeah, that sounds great.
So the other thing is the employee dishonesty or employee theft. So are employers increasing salaries for their employees to match this cost of living increase? I mean, going to the grocery store the other day, I can certainly tell you costs have drastically increased. So are companies paying employees more to offset that? If not, is there an increased financial pressure that employees face due to these costs going up?
Sure.
And, are those employees able to rationalize their fraud or their theft easier?
Yes, I would say they are.
Yes. So, financial statement fraud, what is that?
So, yeah, that's going to be C-suite. It's much less common for financial statement fraud, but financial statement fraud is generally going to cost a lot more. The loss is going to be much greater.
Absolutely.
And when you've got these inflationary times, these C-suite executives, they feel the pressure. They've got to perform. They've got a board of directors that they have to answer to. And so, maybe they fudge the numbers a little bit just to make themselves, look okay.
Yes. So certainly something to be aware of and try to make sure that you're keeping those internal controls as tight as you can, because that goes all the way from the top to the bottom of the food chain in your employees. So what are your external threats that a company would face? So with that, I think top of mind I would think of right now is vendor fraud. There's so many supply chain issues. My husband was working on the house over the summer, and lo and behold, couldn't find things at the home improvement store that he used to be able to find. So there are issues still with supply chain, and there's also staffing shortages. I mean, everywhere you go, it seems that you see a sign of be patient, we're understaffed, be kind to the people who showed up to work.
And this is part of that internal control environment. Third party risk management, right? Vendor fraud. You've really got to vet those vendors.
So how would you do that?
Oh well, there's multiple ways you can do it, but I mean, really, you want to do some sort of research on them.
Some due diligence.
Due diligence. You want to talk to maybe some of their other customers. Make sure that what they're telling you is actually what they're going to deliver.
And if it sounds too good to be true,
It generally is.
yes. And the other thing, we can't avoid it, cyber fraud. I think that's here to stay, that
Yes.
particular risk. And so with that, you've got your phishing, your vishing, your smishing, all of those. You've got your data breach,
Yep.
Identity theft, and ransomware.
Yep. And ransomware is really that's a big one right now.
Yes.
Currently, ransomware.
So with that, what are your best practices or tips to help prevent some of these frauds from occurring within your organization? Paul, what would you say companies should do?
Internal controls.
Ah,
right?
our favorite word.
We come back to it. You just got to make sure that those internal controls are being performed and that they're actually doing what they're designed to do.
So what are some of the things that they should be aware of?
So fraud hotline. That's
Oh.
crucial. I think we're going to touch on that a little bit more later. Let's get your fraud and your cyber risk assessments done. Okay, you've got to know where the risks are.
Good point.
Fraud training. You want to train your employees. You want to make them aware of fraud.
On how to create the fraud.
Not how to create
No.
it, how to
Okay.
recognize it.
Good to know.
And that goes back to the hotline. And then you want to have a policy, right? You've got to have a policy in place, and it's got to be supported by management. So
Absolutely.
your tone at the top.
Very important. And it's important that employees feel comfortable communicating with management about possible fraud occurring within the organization. And did you know that the Association of Certified Fraud Examiners found that 42% of frauds were detected by tips?
Yep, it's vastly higher than any other method of identifying fraud.
Absolutely. So what's one of the ways that employees can feel comfortable by reporting?
The hotline.
Excellent. So it actually is fairly inexpensive to implement a hotline. So very, very useful way to combat fraud.
It is, and I think there's a lot of services out there that will manage it for you.
Excellent. So, and I also read that in the ACFE's report to the nations that organizations with hotlines are able to detect fraud more quickly and have lower fraud losses than those without.
Right, and that it all makes perfect sense, right, with a hotline. Because if I'm an honest employee and I see a dishonest employee, that's not cool.
It's not tattling, right?
No, you're just doing what's right.
Absolutely.
What's ethical.
You have to have an ethical culture at your organization.
Absolutely.
So, yes. So with this, we appreciate you tuning in and learning about some of the fraud risks during these inflationary times.
Thank you all.
Thanks.